We have, is the state justified? Is it useful?
Yes.
So
Hi.
I think,
I'll introduce myself. I'm Rogue Synapse. I'm an anarchist. Some people call me an anarcho-communist, and I'm okay with that. So, Nisha.
yeah. I am NietzscheGuevara. You could describe me as like a libertarian socialist. I believe the state has a role in bringing about whatever social changes that we want, but I don't think it should be the primary force in society. But I am okay. I'm okay with it to some extent. So our debate tonight is the question: is the state justified and is it useful? I think we talked a little bit before this, and I just want to give a little
Yes.
background. And like, I think we kind of agree on the goal, right? Like, we're both socialist leaning.
Yes.
Yeah, we want like communal goods to be the focus. We want equality as like the
Yeah.
main virtue of society, right?
Yes. We want, essentially, we want, basic needs fulfilled, the destruction of capitalism, that sort of thing. Correct?
Right.
Yes.
And so our
Okay.
disagreement is a state like a valid way to bring that about, or is like the state a useful way to bring that about, right?
Yes. Correct. And I postulated that we should probably start this debate by each of us giving our own definition for what the state is. And if we disagree on that, we should probably make a synthesis so we can continue with the arguments based on that new definition. So, would you like to go first, or would you like mine?
I can start because I think for me, I start with the Weberian kind of definition that the state is a monopoly of force in a region or area. And then
Mhm.
I kind of take that to a little further extent because I think we really have to think about what we mean by force. I think
Mhm.
monetary, I think social practices, I think even religion. So, like, I think you have to think about the totality of things that have implication on people's life and have like uh forceful applications through some kind of apparatus, right? So I would
Yes.
start there.
All right. I don't know if this is an express disagreement, or if it is a disagreement, or if it's the same thing but with different words. But I would define the state as a centralized institution with control over the political economy of a given territorial area, and it uses the monopoly on violence to enforce that rule over the political economy. So I think we agree in that the state is enforcing, monetary things, capitalism or the economic system, but I don't know about the religious point. Would you expand on that?
Oh, sure. I just want to be clear that to me, violence is too specific. I think that a state can influence people through force and other means. So I think, like in the medieval ages, right, the Catholic Church was influencing people through kind of like spiritual blackmail in some sense, right? Like if you, well, literally, like a lot of church doctrine was explicitly dealing with like your relation as an individual to the state. And so I think it's not just through violence. It could be through monetary policy, right? Like I don't think for example, like the way libertarians talk about taxation, they say, "Oh, they're holding a gun up to your head." Well, that's not true. Like it's very rare that people go to jail for tax evasion, but they will put a very large monetary
But if
penalty
you do not,
on.
fulfill that penalty, they will um, execute force.
It
I agree
really,
that.
it really depends on how much and what the situation is. So, like, I think just the threat of force maybe is what we mean, and I
Threat
think
of force, yes, I would accept that the threat of force as the being an arm, the main enforcement arm of the state. Yes, I would accept that.
but
Uh,
some things we do, like certain penalties are like parking violations. They're never going to put you in jail for that. Like
True,
practically, yeah.
true.
You know what I mean? So, like, I think some of it is monetary. Even taxation itself, like they kind of like take it from you without you even like they'll do things like was it garnishing wages, right?
Sales
Like
tax, charging weight. Yes, yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it never gets to the point of force because they're like, oh, we can't use force. This is not politically viable. We're just gonna garnish those
I
wages.
would, yes, I agree, but I still think that the threat of force is like the implicit threat is still the important factor in separating the state from something like a propaganda arm of the state or just a general stateless propagandistic force or something like that. Or even, there we have to make the distinction between state violence and non-state violence. But
Well, we
yes, I
so
think we can generally agree on the definition.
yeah, just for the purpose of the argument, though,
All
like
right.
we're gonna
So
say force is
with
more
that in
than.
mind, would you like me to start with my argument against the state?
No, just real quick, just to clarify before we go into it, just you agree that
You
force
there?
entails more than just violence or threat of violence. It could
If
be
you're talking, we can't hear you. We're not picking anything up.
you can't hear me.
I can hear you.
All right. Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I
Yeah,
can
we
hear you.
still can't hear you, buddy.
Still can't hear me.
I think it's
Josh?
on. It's not.
Yeah.
I can hear you. It's not on. I don't think it's on your end, Nietzsche.
Oh, it's Rogue.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I
Here,
can
let me
hear
try
you.
this.
Okay, Rogue, are you there?
Okay, I'm there now. Did you guys hear me at all?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, but like before.
I could hear you, but you couldn't hear me. But everyone else was hearing me, so I think it was on your end.
Yes, probably. All right.
So I
Okay.
just wanted to clarify before we move on. You agree with me that force can extend to more than just violence.
I think that force has a implicit threat of violence, but in general, that threat can be concealed in something by means other than violence. So I guess so.
Okay. So I don't. To me, you're being a little mealy mouth there, but I think we agree in general, right? Like
In
force.
general, I think we agree on like what the state is.
Okay, cool. So why don't you give me your definition of the statement, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so my definition again, or my argument?
Oh, sorry, your argument. Yeah.
Okay, my argument. Basically, I see the state as an impractical means of moving social emancipation forward. From my perspective, history, uh, from my perspective, the state is the ultimate expression of taking autonomy and therefore exploiting others. It's a hierarchy class relationship where those at the top of the hierarchy are always looking for their interests, and the interests of those in lower positions of the hierarchy do not matter. So I think in the context of a socialist revolution, that a state presents a existential threat to the revolution because should those in a position lower than whatever the Marxists call it, an executive committee which controls the state until X, Y, and Z is reached or whatever, should they be in a position which is not antithetical to socialism or, social progress, but antithetical to their specific interests, then the state will move to call those people falsely conscious or counter-revolutionaries or something. And we see this in historical examples. So it is my view that the state, while it can be a useful apparatus, is ultimately too much of a risk for bringing about a social revolution and eventually communist change in the world.
Okay. So I guess I'll give you my
Please
response
do.
to that. Yeah. So, to me, this kind of hinges on your view of human nature, because it seems to me like you're saying people that are in power are going to abuse that power to their own ends in some way. And the state is like the ultimate power that you can give someone. Being head of state or being given like a ministry position, commissar or something of that sort is like the ultimate like setting someone up to abuse a certain form of power. And so we should proceed from the position that that is the case unilaterally, um or sorry, ubiquitously, I guess would be the correct word. Like anyone in that position would abuse the power, and go with a decentralized kind of organization. Is that correct characterization of your view?
I would say largely. I wouldn't say it's because I automatically suspect that everybody in a position of power will abuse that power. I think that most people in state positions do not necessarily abuse their power, but I do think that the risk of that abuse is always there, and that states as entities primarily, when they exist, they primarily seek to preserve themselves above all other goals, and then further their control as a secondary goal, just in general. So I don't see the sort of Marxist position that the state will self self dissolve as a very tenable one. This is not to say that I think that the Marxist state will automatically be hostile to the workers or will automatically be terrible or something. It's more to say that if we want to proceed with the goal in mind being that the state should eventually be abolished, I think the better goal is to not run the risk of an unscrupulous minister, uh, or a power grab, or the view of the executive committee uh, running perpendicular to the view of certain other groups. So while I think that, it's not an automatic thing, I think that because the risk is there, we should at least aim towards more decentralization. But yeah, you could perceive that as my position, yes.
Yeah, but I want to go back to the human nature thing, because it seems to me like you're saying that people are going to act in such a way, like you're concerned about that. But I don't, to me, I would flip that and say, well, in an anarchist kind of situation, let's say there is an anarchist revolution, I feel like you have the same problem. What's to stop someone from taking advantage of their position, say like a Macno figure, and like either doing exactly what you're concerned with, which is centralizing power, or abusing the military force that they have under the guise of anarchism?
Well, yes, that is a very that's a very penitent, not penitent. That's a very relevant statement, and it's probably one of the reasons why platformism hasn't been the main tendency of anarchism since 1923 or so. But yes, I understand that, and it is something that we also have to risk if we go through the route of, instead of a decentralized insurrection, decentralized sort of Malatestian um, synthetic federation route, if we go instead towards a more centralized insurrectionary army route, it is something we definitely have to watch out for, and a risk similar to the risk of the Marxist state. Um, and in that case, I think I'd say the main method of stopping that, other than not having that sort of organizational structure, would be to use the lack of monopoly over force to your advantage and isolate such individuals and deal with them according to proper ways. But human nature argument.
Well, real quick, because to me, you're falling back on the Marxist argument, right? You're like, oh, these people are using the monopoly of force to their advantage, but then they're going to unilaterally disarm once they're done with it.
It's more of using a lack of monopoly of force to your advantage. And yes, they are. I'm not saying that we should disarm. I'm a well believer in the fact that the workers should be armed, but I'm more saying that if we isolate central authority figures such as a Mackinac-like figure or some other person like that who has attained a following and is using their position to exploit others, then our response should be to not exactly use a monopoly of force, but to respond in kind with our own force against their attempted assertion of monopoly. And I guess some people could construe that as a monopoly of force. I would disagree mostly because of like lack of a centralized sort of institution responding to that attempt of control. But yeah, but human nature. You wanted to fall back to the human nature thing. I don't think. Okay, how do I describe this? I think that given a position in a power hierarchy, this isn't always true, but it's usually true. Humans will sometimes tend to use that advantage to the disadvantage of those lower in the dynamic. So, for example, let's say gender. In societies which usually had a sex-aligned gender, the male group used their superior physical strength, which they usually had, to subjugate and eventually make into slaves, make into various sex workers and such, the female group. And that sort of continued and spiraled in, especially in Europe, into a more generalized patriarchy, a more generalized misogyny. And I'm thinking that while that's not always true of most humans, uh, the fact that it's a tendency of humans to when they have a superior power position to use that to leverage themselves into even greater positions or to exploit and abuse those lower in the hierarchy. I think that it's a tendency we cannot ignore, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I agree, but to me, this falls back onto your argument against the state. It seems like you're making the same argument against the state that I would make against like revolutionary anarchy, right? Because you give a certain power, like you're going to have leaders in any.
Well, yes, we're going to have some people who are good at X and some people who are good at Y, and yes, they
Well,
will.
but here, let me make my point real quick, and I will give you a chance to respond. Yeah,
Okay.
but like to me, you're like you want to make this critique of the state and say that people will do this, and you're saying a tendency. To me, that's the same as saying like a majority of people will do this thing, right?
I'm not.
I mean, I wouldn't say a tendency if you don't mean a majority would do it. Because if a minority are going to do it, then you wouldn't make that claim, right? But I would say that yeah, I would throw the same argument back at you. If you give people enough power under them, regardless of if it's under a state apparatus or a militia or even like just a voluntary group, yeah, they probably will abuse the power. And that's why I think that the most effective way to bring about change in a society is to use the state apparatus because they are the ones that are going to be the most effective at bringing about change. And I think as long as you are good at weaponizing the majority, you're going to bring about the changes that you want.
Okay, I disagree with that last statement mostly because I see the state more as I don't really see the state as a method to bring about any real social change unless, of course, that state is threatened by uh
Why is
by
the state
violence
different than
against it.
any other group? Like real quick, because why is the state different than like a collective of individuals? Why are you making an assumption?
Because they have
A
this
collective of-
monopoly on violence, and they have control over the political economy. They have this control while other groups do not. An anarchist group would not necessarily have control over the political economy unless it was like a completely
well, if
it
they
was a
won, they
very
would.
small it was if they wouldn't have control over the political economy in the presence of a monopoly on violence. And even if they did have that, it wouldn't be a minority, which in the state's case is in the case of the state, it would be a minority of those in control. In the case of the anarchist commune, it would be the consensus of the entire community in
Well, that's my
control.
problem. That's my problem with these kind of analyses, right? Because, like, to me, a state gets its power from the either tacit or complete consent of the governed. So,
I disagree with that notion.
if the majority of the state disagreed with the state, they would overthrow the state. Like, you just
Well, there's the thing, though. First of all, you have the fact that the state is always going to be, especially nowadays, is always going to be more powerful than the majority of the people.
no,
Second,
I disagree with that.
they
Yeah,
would they have the military apparatus, they have the organizational apparatus, they have the police apparatus, they have
doesn't mean
the
they're
military industrial complex on their side. They are going to be more powerful
it
than the
doesn't mean they're
majority.
more powerful than the majority. Like if
They would
50,
be
if
more powerful than
let's
majority, even if they had a even if they majority
hear
was
me out real
against the
quick.
state.
50%, 51% of the United States is what, 150 million people. You think if
Yes,
150 million people did not like the state and they decided to overthrow it, that the government could fight them off? You think that's a
if they
possibility?
were not if they were not organized and if they intended themselves to make new states, then I would say it's a definite possibility, especially for an untrained population.
I would say no.
Students
I mean,
especially
that's
nowadays.
ridiculous. Like if you look at like the amount of like take Russia and Ukraine for instance. Like the amount of people fighting, given the populations of those countries, is infinitesimal. So like if you were to say that the majority was like really fed up with the state and they wanted to overthrow it, like the
By
state
what
would.
method, though? By what method would they overthrow the state if they have no method
I
to
mean, if you're talking
overthrow the
about the United States, it's like easy. Like we have like a Second Amendment that is very loosely defined, and they have the ability to have arms that like could easily, with the amount of people that we have,
I
overthrow
don't
the
really
government.
I think you're really overestimating the advantage of population over military arms. I would argue that it's possible, but only if you had a very specific insurrectionist organizational structure with the intention of abolishing the state in
So
its
you're talking
entirety.
about like, you're saying like if a majority of people like that's a large number of people like
I'm damn
most
saying if the
military
majority of
engagements
people.
are like in the hundreds of thousands, not even in the millions. A majority of people is in the hundreds of millions. Like
Yes,
I don't
because the
like to
majority,
me
an untrained majority, is not as good as a trained fighting force with access to the hardware
no
that they have, even if
a
they
majority of people with like the arms that we have access to, and honestly, we have access to a lot of illegal arms, probably would be able to overthrow the state.
okay,
Like that's
let's
ridiculous.
I completely disagree, but let's break off
150
that.
million people could not overthrow the state. You really think
I'm
that?
saying that if they are not
Let's be honest.
organized, and if
You
they
think that
I'm saying if they are not organized, and if they are
150 million people couldn't
if
overthrow this?
a mob of 150 million people who are not organized and not do not have a clear intent of aim could not overthrow the state because the state would simply divide and conquer.
I don't buy that. Okay.
I-
So this is like a very weird counterfactual you're posing to, because you're like saying the majority of people don't want a state and they're willing to overthrow it, but then they're not organized in any way. Like, why would that be the case?
They don't. You didn't specify the organization. Of course, if a 150 million people were organized with the singular intent of overthrowing and abolishing the state forever, and they had a clear method of going about it, then yes, I'd say it's possible. But simply saying that a majority doesn't agree with the state, not that they want to abolish the state, not that they even have a singular goal in mind, if they just simply do not agree with the state, I'd say that is far easier for states to take care of, even
Oh,
non-violently.
sure, yeah, but that's tacit consent, right? But like we're talking about like if people wanted to overthrow the government, they could definitely do that.
If people wanted to overthrow the government, they could. The problem is
Okay, good.
that the problem is right now, apart from the whole power of ideology and subconscious that statist governments have over the population through, media, through educational control. Apart from that entire issue and the issue of organizing them, I'd say that what was I trying to say before we got on this tangent?
I don't say
Um,
it's a tangent. I think it's important to like, because we agree, like, if it was the case that the majority wanted to overthrow the government and they were able to organize it, they could, right? Like the numbers
yes,
are just
but I wouldn't. Yes, I'd say they could, but I wouldn't say that indicates that states derive their power from consent of the governed. I would say more that states derive their power from the wealth of those in control of states rather than the consent of the governed.
I don't think states necessarily. I think that um it's to an extent they derive their power from the consent of the governed. But yes, I agree with you. Like the state has a lot of leeway in between where they can like focus that energy into other areas. I think we would agree on that, right? Like
Oh,
they can funnel revolutionary energy into like the electoral system
yeah,
or into
obviously.
like maybe the DNC, like parties that go nowhere, or the Green
Yes,
Party in the United States, right?
yes, like that's exactly my point. The state has this, at least modern states. It wasn't so much the case in, say, the late 18th, 19th, or 19th centuries, but especially now in the modern sense, that states have this enormous power over the governed. They have the ability to disseminate media and educational materials, which propagate against certain ideas, propagate for certain ideas, to the point where, for most people, the very inner desires and wants of a population are uh, they're manipulated by the state, so to say.
Yeah, but to me, the most effective way would be to use that, right? So like you would organize people, because like regardless
I would,
of what, no, real quick, regardless of whether you think the state has this monopoly or not, and whether you're like going to organize some anarchist insurrection or not, you're going to have to organize people. Like
yes, we're going to
that's
have
just
to
the bottom
organize,
line.
but I'd
So
rather.
why not use that and take advantage of that monopoly of force and use it to re-educate people, to make people understand, give them class consciousness or things that will make them understand their situation, and use that monopoly to your advantage. Why unilaterally disarm and say we're not going to engage in this and we're going to go
because
outside of this?
I because I believe, right, that doing so, this forced re-education, these force of law, this non-consensual establishment power and of laws and such over the governed does nothing but create dissent within the state. That the state essentially is nothing more than contained chaos, right? It's a contained it's a contained discontent, which is oftentimes like barely able to be contained. Because if you try to force people to follow your order, if you try to coerce, if you try to force to re-educate, if you try to do all of this, all you're going to do is build resentment against that order. All you're going to do is create dissent against yourself and jeopardize your own revolutionary potential, your own idea of the emancipation of all, because essentially what you're doing is you're saying we want emancipation for all, and we're going to force everyone to follow this exact line of emancipation for all. I don't see how that could be a really good supportive structure or a viable structure in the long run, because I see more of voluntary order, a voluntary order, a people willingly wanting to dissent against the state, people willingly wanting to come together in this communal sort of arrangements of production. That is what I see as viable in long term. Because if you're going to do this coercively, then all you're going to do is end up creating resentment. The only true long term order you can really generate without all of this dissent is a voluntary order.
Well, now you sound like an ANCAP to me. And like this notion of consent, I question it because I think that we as humans, we don't know much beyond like the situation that we're in. And like, even us in this Discord discussing this political ideas, like we don't have much of a vision beyond the social order that we're in. And I think that when you say like, oh, you're going to coerce people into believing this specific thing, like, no, like we have education systems now where you can bring in freedom of speech and you can bring in like ways to ameliorate the problems you're talking about. And like you can have discursive reasoning with people and you can allow the state to be a medium through which you disseminate your ideas. To me, you're taking this very specific Marxist-Leninist kind of conception, which I don't agree with, and you're inserting it upon like any conception of the state. Like I don't think you need it to have an authoritarian state. In fact, I don't even think the state right now is particularly authoritarian. I think the issue is more. I think the issue with the state right now is more the mode of production in capitalism, not so much that they're down our throats, because really, right, like in the 50s, we couldn't have this conversation right now without being on some kind of like FBI blacklist. I highly doubt that we
I'm
are.
already on an FBI blacklist.
I doubt that. I don't know where you're getting that from. In
I
fact, you sound like a paranoid schizophrenic.
I literally got a Freedom of Information Act request, and I am on one of those.
Okay. Well, I probably am not. So I have not had that. And I don't really know what did you say that got you on that?
It's not what I say, it's what I did. And what I did was I attempted to
Oh,
make
okay.
a socialist experiment, an anarchist experiment within my community twice. And
Mm.
both of the times I was arrested for it, and I was put on an FBI list for potential domestic violent extremists because I dared practice my ideology and dared practice what I believe in nonviolently. The state assessed me as a potential enemy.
I mean, I don't know about this. I have plenty of friends that have communes. They're not on FBI watch lists. We can practice things for the most part. And regardless, I don't know if to me the burden of proof would be that the anarchist solution would be better off because I don't know how you prevent that state from arising again.
Well, that's the thing. We can, first of all, once we recognize the conditions which created the state, right? That being mostly kinship systems, property systems, things like that, then we can avoid and we can recognize and avoid these things which created the state, and prolong ourselves and through that,
Well, I mean, didn't
enhance.
kinship and property systems create the state?
I would argue that the main progenitor of the state was kinship systems of, family rights over certain goods and such that
I mean, how do
evolved
you
into,
avoid kinship relationships?
yeah,
I don't
I would say they evolved into property systems over
know,
time
but how do you
and
avoid
were
them?
not stopped. Well, you can avoid them through, explicitly saying that all property is communal. These kinship
Oh, through a
systems are.
state, through force.
You could say that's through force. I wouldn't say that's through state. I would say that's through
Say that's
community
through
action.
force. No, but community action is the state.
No, that's where I disagree. The community action is not the state, right? The state is very specific. It's a centralized institution. Community action
How
is
how do
by
you
its
distinguish
nature
community action
decentralized.
from the state? How is it decentralized? To me, community action means you're centralizing power into the community.
I wouldn't argue that. I would argue that it's more of people individually and eventually as groups taking action to prevent exploitation of themselves.
There, let's stop there. What from individual to group? What is the difference?
Number of people, that's pretty simple.
No, it's not pretty simple. Like
Yes,
you're
it
saying,
is.
we go from the individual to the
The
group.
individual and the group.
Centralized action is when a group is taking actions for a collective of individuals, right? So, like, what are
I
you
wouldn't
saying?
argue that a group is taking action to preserve the larger group. I would argue that's a decentralized action unless it's,
Okay, that
done from on
definition
high,
is
but
cool.
without a
No.
hierarchy, right, to tell people, yes,
Okay,
you
well,
must do
you have a
this, then
hierarchy.
it's how can it be a centralized
Okay,
system?
what happens when you have this non-hierarchical group? One side says, I want to ban gendered pronouns, and the other side says, no, I don't want that.
Like ban all gendered pronouns?
Yeah.
Well, then they could separate themselves if they want to.
Okay, so now you have two different communities.
Yes.
So in those groups, what's going to stop?
They shouldn't be forced to get along is the
Well,
thing. It
what's
should be
what's going to
entirely
stop? What's
voluntary.
going to stop the group that wants the pronouns to insert force on the group that doesn't, or vice versa?
Well, if they do that, then the other groups around them will probably decide that they are engaging in an exploitative action. They are trying to
No, they're
force
not going
the
to decide that. They're
neighbors.
going to pick sides with one of the groups, right? Because they're going to exploit their advantage.
Not going to exploit their advantage.
They're not going to.
The idea is
So these
to.
other groups don't have a dog in the fight, right? They don't have opinions about the
They
pronouns at
do have
all.
a dog. They do have a dog in the fight, though. They do have a
Okay,
dog in the fight because if one group starts to subjugate and starts to impose its will upon another group, then you got the genesis for a state there, and then everybody is in danger.
yeah, but what if these other groups want a state? What if they're like, okay, I actually think that it's better that we do have the pronouns, and let's jump on board with the pronoun group, and they work together to overthrow the other group, and then they're like,
In that case, everybody else's would be destroying them. Would be saying, no, you cannot do that. You cannot impose
why
things
would
upon
everybody
the
else
other
be
people.
saying that? That's ridiculous assumption that's coming from nowhere. You're bringing in like an assumption that has not like, and this is why I was talking about your assumption about human nature, right? You're saying that there's something fundamental about human nature that's going to stop people from exploiting the power they have, or you're going to say,
I'm not saying
I
that
think
there's
you have,
something. I'm saying that if they want to maintain their voluntary positions, and if
yeah,
they
but what if they
want
don't
to
want that?
maintain
What if they don't
living
want that
in a.
though? And like, here's the thing. I don't think that we can make any assumption about what they do or what they don't want to do. In fact, I think our wants mainly come from the fact that we live in a social environment and we have a certain mode of how we go about things, and that's where our wants come from. And so, yes, some of those wants are in opposition to things that are bad, but for the most part, what the thing that we live in determines our wants. So to say that,
Yes, and
oh,
what we live in and now what we're living in this hypothetical anarchist society is anarchism, which is a reward in itself. It's a reward in itself because it preserves freedom of action for all of those within it.
because it
It
doesn't
preserves
preserve.
freedom. It preserves freedom from want. It preserves freedom from fear.
No, it doesn't preserve that. In fact, it depends on what the people within that community actually want, which you've already conceded.
If they want freedom from if
If
they want
they want,
anarchism
I guarantee they want.
if they want anarchism, then they're going to want freedom from want and freedom
Yeah,
from
if
fear
they
because
want
you
that,
cannot
why
have that
guarantee
without
that
it.
they want anarchism? Like you don't have that guarantee. The only way that you can guarantee
In that case you're
is, bro,
literally assuming that a state of society is natural, which is completely
I'm not
untrue.
assuming I'm not assuming that. In fact, I would say a state arises under certain conditions, right? I'm not saying that's natural. But I would say that in a situation where we already have a state, the only way that you're going to guarantee that people want certain things is to use the state.
Well, yes, but
Or,
you're saying that in a situation which we already have a state, and in this situation you yourself are describing, we do
yeah,
not have a state.
yes, we already have one. We already have one. Like,
No,
what are
we
you
do not have one. We do not
You
have a
don't have a
state
state?
under our
Okay.
own definition.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize we didn't have a state right now. I'm sorry.
I thought you were talking about a hypothetical anarchist society, were you not?
I'm talking about like the way to go from a society
From
that has a
here
state
to there.
to a
In that case, the idea is in that case, the whole argument you're making in that case, the idea is to do this through insurrectionary action and through
yeah,
construction of
they're
dual
giving
power
monopoly of
groups.
force into some group, right? Because they're the ones doing the insurrectionary action. They now have a monopoly of force if they win. So what are you going to do about those people? How are you going to stop them from monopolizing their force into forcing people to do what they want? How are you going to stop them from forcing people to use pronouns or not using pronouns? You have no mechanism to do that. There's nothing because you're
And do
denying.
you have any mechanism to prevent the state from becoming an authoritarian dictatorship? Do you?
I don't have
Do
one, but
you?
I don't.
Of
I don't
course you
think
don't have one. You do not have one.
because I think it's going to
What
arise regardless of
problem
what I
is
can
the
do.
state
So I think that we
trying to
should weaponize
solve?
the state. We should weaponize the state.
What problem is the state trying to solve? Give that to me. What problem is the state trying to
Right
solve?
there, because we have a state, and I want to use the state to solve the problem. It doesn't matter
That's
what.
not
I
No,
don't.
no,
I'm
that's
not
not
viewing the
my
state as
question. You're avoiding my question. What problem is
your
the state
question.
seeking to solve?
Listen, I don't view the state as some teleological entity that we bring about because we want it. In fact, I don't
What
think most of us, in the ideal world, most of us wouldn't have a state. But guess what? We have one, and we have to deal with that. So I would say the
we
best course.
have one and we should destroy it
No,
because that's the
these
only
ways.
method by which we can attain freedom.
Well, no, show me like here's the thing. Destroying a state is going to make conditions that are so much worse than what they are now that like they'll fucking kill you, honestly. Like the
You
like
want to kill me?
you, me, everyone on this forum, anyone that's slightly different than what the consensus want, like they're going to die in this situation. Because
Why?
why? Because
Yes.
there is no state, there is anarchy. There's no one prescribing any rules. And listen,
Okay, first of all, that assumption is incorrect. That assumption is completely incorrect. Anarchism isn't without being without
why do you,
rules.
why do you,
Anarchism is having a voluntary set of rules
well,
which
you're
we
defining it
decide as a community. That is what anarchism is. Again, anarchism is not
you're saying the
chaos,
state.
it is
You're saying the
voluntary
state.
order. The state is chaos, a
Ain't
state
chaos.
creates chaos.
Actually, I think anarchy is organized chaos in the sense
No,
that you're going to bring about something that whoever is the strongest is going to be the one that dominates the situation. They're going to decide the rules. This is what
what proof
happened
do
when
you
you
have of that? What
had
proof do
control
you
over
have of
the
that?
Soviet Union, and he was using his power to do whatever the fuck he wanted.
Who?
Machno.
he wasn't using his power to do whatever he wanted. You have to read more about the Free Territory.
Did not endorse the state.
He was not using his power to do whatever he wanted. He was using his power to fight the white armies and the red armies. He had pretty much not much at all control of the civilian situation, which was to some degree to his detriment, but he was mostly focused on the military side. But even with that in mind, what proof do you have that a strong person would immediately become in control of the state? They are not good at everything.
Here's the
Nobody
proof.
can be good at
Here's the proof.
everything. How
Going
would
north,
they immediately control the consensus? How would they
I'll give you a proof.
immediately?
There's no anarchist society. There's the proof.
There is anarchist societies
Where?
everywhere you look if you look hard enough.
Everywhere. Okay.
Yes, there's anarchist societies from Copenhagen to Athens, from
You think Athens
Mexico.
is an anarchist society?
In parts of Athens, yes.
Parts of Athens? Okay, what parts?
Exarchia.
What does that mean? Tell us.
Exarchia is a neighborhood within Athens.
And
It has a radical democracy, radical consensus democracy, and it has been for the last
democracy is a
decade
type
and a
of
half
state, right?
been
Democracy is a type
attempting
of state.
to. It's been attempting to establish itself as an anarchist society.
Okay, so
The
it's not an anarchist society. It's attempting to establish itself as one. So it's not one.
It's not one yet, but that doesn't mean it's not
Okay,
one
so
in
that's not an example.
entirety.
Why are you bringing up something that's not an anarchist state as an example of an anarchist state? Give me a real example.
I'm bringing up examples of anarchist attempts and the
I don't care about it.
anarchist
I'm asking you
projects.
what's the real one.
Okay, you want real ones, and
And here's the thing. I'm not trying to
go to southern Mexico. Look to that.
Southern-
Tell me that is not something of an anarchist society in the
I don't know.
EZLN.
I mean, something
Go
of
to the Go to the AANES. Tell me that is not at least to some degree an anarchistic
I don't
society.
know what that means.
Go
'Cause to me,
back to the
I would
1930s.
say
Go back to
something-
1936. Tell me that
Go back to
that
1930.
revolution. Tell me that revolutionary Catalonia was not an attempt of an anarchist society.
I don't care about
Go
attempt.
to
But
literally any commune, literally any zone to defend
communes
in
aren't.
Europe, in North America, in Asia. Go to them. Tell me that they are not anarchist societies, or at the very least trying to create them. Tell me that an anarchist society does not exist, that they cannot exist.
Well, I see a lot
Tell
of
me
attempts. I don't see a real one. But I also, to me, you're advocating for libertarianism, not for
I'm not advocating for. If I was advocating for libertarianism, I wouldn't be. I would support currency. I would support private ownership of the means of production. I would support all of these
all
things
these
that
things that
these
you're bringing up have,
Rothbardians, these feudalists want. That's not something
buddy.
I want.
All the things that you brought up have currency. So all the supposed attempts at anarchy are not
EZLN does not have currency.
Who? Explain it to us. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm let me start over. I am not a Rothbardian. I am not a libertarian. I do not believe in capitalism. I believe in collective ownership of the means of production,
Hold on.
just as you do.
Ridiculous.
I am a communist.
Being a libertarian does not mean you're a capitalist. There's libertarian socialists, so don't conflate.
I'm not a libertarian socialist either, because I do not believe in the state.
Okay. So go ahead and restart, because don't bring up.
I do not believe in a state at all. I do not believe in centralized institutions with monopolies over violence. I do not believe that the commune, as we both defined as states, I do not believe a commune falls within that definition. I believe.
What's the mechanism that keeps the commune from becoming a state? Tell me.
What do you mean exactly? What you mean? Like, what prevents the centralization of?
Yeah.
What prevents the centralization of power? I would say the consensus democratic system. I would say lack of monopoly and violence, resulting in community enforcement and community.
You're saying the lack of a state prevents a state. That's not anything. What stops a state from being a state? What is your mechanism? How do you stop the state from being it?
I already told you there are modes by which we can recognize what
No,
a
give me
state
like a
is
concrete
and
idea.
use
Give me
that
a
as
concrete. How are you going to stop a state from coming about in this society? Like
what
what if you're not if you don't have a monopoly on violence, how are you going to stop someone else from creating it? What is the mechanism? I think that there might be one. Give me one.
1 second, I need to check my notes. Okay. 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 Okay, you do realize most societies have never voluntarily developed states, true or false?
I would say true. In fact, that's exactly why I'm asking you this question.
All right. All right. From the perspective of those societies, would we say that the state is a choice?
Um, not a conscious choice, but I think it's a tacit choice. But I don't. That doesn't really matter. I'm asking you what is the mechanism
If
that
it
will
is,
stop a state from arising. I don't. I don't really care if it's a choice or not. Whether a state arises, I care about if it's a choice. Like, how do we stop a state from arising, given that they keep doing that?
okay.
Because I agree. I agree. Like, no, I don't think a state ever. I think it's for the most part, from my reading of history, states have never been like consciously like,
Okay.
oh,
First of
we as
all,
a
I think
people.
that the idea that the state is an inevitability to
Yeah,
reemerge, first of all, I think that's very Eurocentric perception of history. Secondly, um, I think that there are non-statist means either through communal communal use of force, which is not statist use of force, but communal use of force, communal defense against the state is a means by which we can prevent the state. It's a means by which we can prevent so-called big men, so-called strong men from taking control of the state. I
what
also
does that
think
mean though?
that
'Cause, like, to me, like militias and things that create states are exactly what you're describing, and then they
I'm
create.
not describing that's not a militia. That's not really a militia, is it? That's just people
Well, if you're just
defending
going to define
themselves
as
and
any,
their idea.
no, if you're going to define
It's people
anything
defending
as
themselves from exploitation. That's not exactly a militia.
okay, but like, here's the thing: you need to be outside of the state already to have what you're wanting for. But we have a state, so how are you going to go outside the state and create the thing you're wanting when we don't have that?
You're asking how we create. You're asking how we create an stateless society from a state one. Is that correct?
No, I'm saying, how do you prevent a
No,
society?
you were saying that we already have a state, right? You were saying that we already have a state. So in that situation, if we already have a state, then yes, the idea would be to instill revolution and general
How do you
anarchy.
do that when the state has a monopoly on like education?
How do you do that when a state has monopoly of on education? You could build it's the same things you want. You can build dual power structures. You can educate people on class
Then why can't you just make
consciousness.
a state that's good? If you're able to like re-inform people in the way that goes outside the state, why not use the state to do what you want?
Because of the risk inherent to the state,
There's no
which I've
risk
already
inherent
told
any
you.
more than the risk of not having a state, because those people can just recreate a state that's different than the one you want. To me, you're just saying that like the thing that I imagine is better than the thing that exists. And I just to me that doesn't make any
I'm saying that was you want to use the state as you want to use the master's tool, right? You want to use it to try and destroy the master's house. I know that's sloganism, but what I'm saying is that if you try to use the state, if you try to use these coercive means to maybe not seize the means of production, but to force education, to force your Marxist ideal, upon the population.
I mean, I'm not a Marxist,
for-
so I'll bring that in.
I
But,
mean,
yeah.
to force
But
this
for example, yeah.
libertarian socialist ideal on the population, to force all of this, all you're going to do is create counter-revolutionary activity, either from people who genuinely want a more emancipated, more voluntary anti-capitalist society, or from people who are reactionary to
And you're not going
your
to do that.
ideals,
Hold
to
on, but you're
your
not going to do that with people that like the state when you're trying to overthrow the state. Of course, you're going to do that.
to what? I'm
You're
not
going
going
to
to. No,
reactionary.
I'm not going to force. I'm not going to force education. I'm not go. If somebody wants to kill me, or if there are a group of
You're not
people
going to
looking to kill me, or the commune, or whatever, then yes, we're going to try and defend ourselves from them. But no, I'm not going to force people into education. I'm not going to force people to adopt my ideology. I'm going to try and lead by example and try to use emancipatory means for emancipatory ends instead of using
What does that
coercive
mean? What does that
words.
entail? So
What
wait,
is that?
you're saying like I've overthrown the state. Now I'm going to like not force anyone to engage with the ideas that I overthrew the state.
What do you mean exactly? First of all, to overthrow the state, that kind of, I think we both agree, that kind of requires already a majority, or at least a large percentage of the population, to agree with the notion of overthrowing the
Like
state,
I'm
because if
saying,
you
because
don't,
you're
then
not
you're
gonna like, yeah, because like before you overthrow the state, these questions of education don't
yeah.
matter, right? So like we've overthrown the state. The
If
anarchists,
we've overthrown the state, okay, we can. If we've overthrown the state, we can already assume there's a significant, right, contingent of the population that believes in our cause, for lack of a better word.
we could say like a minority can overthrow the state because I don't think it takes that
Okay,
much.
yes, a minority can. I
How many,
disagree that a
how many
minority can
people will
overthrow a modern state, but sure, for sake of argument, let's say a
you
minority can
don't
overthrow the
think
state.
Russia was not a
I would say our I would say that our best position in that is to, in at least depending on our the material positions we find ourselves in, our best position in that is to lead more by example and try to assist others within still status societies to revolt and to engage in things against the state, to try and spread a revolution through voluntary action, uh through different revolutionary
yeah.
cells
I mean,
across the
all you're
world,
saying is like
instead of
we could do like you're not giving me the mechanism. And to me,
like
honestly,
what exact mechanisms do you want? Do you want things like donating weapons? Do you want things like leading by, I don't know, having our society having our series of federated societies be more,
well, how do you even
like,
keep the
definitely
federation?
less exploitative than a capitalist state,
How do
definitely
you keep the
providing
federation?
resource needs for everyone.
How
Like,
do you keep the federation? How do you keep the series of federations? I don't get
how do
that.
you keep a series of that's more of a, you should probably read Malatesta. That's more of a,
Read anyone, like tell me. If you understand it, then just tell me. I don't need to read anything.
I'm trying to describe. It's hard for me to voice chat debate. I'm trying to describe. Essentially, if, say, we want to do things as a commune, but we can't do it by ourselves. We don't have enough X, Y, or Z, or we want to regulate something for the good of a general area, right? Then, as communes, we would um, join together for these specific purposes, right? For building a railroad across, XYZ area, for regulating something like electricity or nuclear things or whatever. We would voluntarily have these federations by which we regulate these things. We build these things. That's
You're not
the
giving me any
basic idea.
You're just
That's the,
saying that we will voluntarily do these things. I just don't.
I'm saying that
How do you make people do that?
it's in the interest of the we don't make people do that. It's in the interest of the commune to do that because we can't do these things by
How do you convince
ourselves.
people it's in the interest? How do you convince them that? You have to convince them.
The material conditions already convince them of the interest of doing
I
X,
don't
Y, Z
understand.
thing.
Why the material condition could convince them to be a socialist, a fascist? We don't know what's going to convince them to do.
The material.
You have
You're
one person that's like comes along and says like, I'm going to give you the material conditions that you want. What's to stop people from saying, okay, that guy's right? Like that's what happens.
They need
Like
to
you,
prove it first of all. They need to prove that, and
no,
even
they
if they,
don't.
yes, they do.
No, they don't. They just have
Yes,
to
they
say
do.
it, and then like the person with the most convincing argument generally wins, or the person with the most power. Because I would believe that the person that has an
How would
army
they have?
behind them is going to be the one that's going to bring about the things that I want, right? I don't think the person that's like, let's all just consent to this idea, and like I have the communal force. I don't even know what that means because you haven't even convinced me to join your force yet.
Join what force?
Well, this is why people gravitate towards like billionaires and like the loudest voice in the room because they are already that is what convinces people that they're going to bring about the change that they want. Like you saying these
And
things does
how
not
would your
mean-
state be any different, really?
I
Though
don't like
that's
I think
how would
that
your state
here's
be
the
any
thing.
different?
I think that from the point where the modern state arose, which is, late medieval ages till now, we are better off than we've ever been because of the state. Because I think the
No,
state gives us,
that is completely
no, I think,
disingenuous.
and I
That
think
is
the state
completely
provides the
disingenuous. No, we
conditions.
have not been in a better condition, and if
Yeah, we
anything,
have.
we've been in a worse
Okay.
condition
Well, you're the one that is
because of the
sitting here on the
capitalist state.
Discord, able to discuss ideas without having
Yes,
to
I
work
am able to
on the
do that, but
farm
that's not because of the
through the
state.
state. Yes, the state
That
is
is not because
actually
it's not
a
because
good
of the
thing.
state that we have the internet. It's not because of the state that we have electricity. It's
Who
not
funded
because
the
of the
who
state
funded
that
the
we have
internet? Who gave the money for the internet to come about? Who
not
gave
it,
people the
it
idle leisure time?
that's the state didn't give that. The state didn't give that. All
The
right?
state
That's
didn't
not
give
the
that. How
fault
did the
of
internet
the
start?
state.
How'd the internet start?
The internet started by an idea of two people who thought, well,
No,
not
it
two
didn't.
people, but a lot of people who thought, hey, what
Oh,
if
maybe
we have
like
all these networks? We have all these networks already. Why don't we have one
you mean the
protocol
Department
for
of
them to?
Defense? You mean the Department of Defense,
It's not
right?
the Department of Defense. That
Yes,
was
they started the internet. Yes.
they started the ARPANET, which is distinct from the internet.
Okay.
The ARPANET was a different network. The internet was more of an expansion of the idea we can make one
Okay.
protocol to have all these
So
different
ARPANET started
networks
the
talk
internet.
to each other.
Yeah.
The ARPANET is a precursor, but it's not the internet. The internet was more of an idea of we can already make some of these networks talk to each other with one protocol. Why don't we expand that
Here.
worldwide?
I'm
Which
looking.
isn't
Look,
a which
I'm
isn't
looking
doesn't
through
require the state.
right now. I'm looking through the history of the internet, and every single one of these programs are funded by either the state or a project that was given money by a state. So, like, what are you talking about? The way
What
that
are
people produce things that are useful to society is through leisure. And how do you get leisure? Through money and funding and research. And
Yeah,
here's
but you
what
don't need it. First of all, we don't need money in a society. We can both agree on that, right?
what?
Hopefully.
I don't agree with that. No.
That how are you a socialist? Okay.
Socialists don't necessarily want to get rid of money. I think
Yes,
Marx,
I want to
maybe
get
some
rid of money
Marxists,
because
they were
I am
Marxists.
a socialist, I am a communist, and you are not.
Point to me where in Marx he says get rid of money.
Literally, Frederick Engels says that. He
Frederick
literally
Engels
says
isn't Marx. I asked you in Marx, where does he say that?
they literally said that
Where?
because of the
Where?
I will describe it to you right now. Okay, 1 second. One second. Uh
I'm not saying what did Marx say, Marxist anti-copium. here's the
The
thing: is I'm
principles of
maintaining that.
the principles of communism.
Where?
Finally, when all capital,
Where?
all
Where are you getting this
the
from?
principles of production of communism, Section
Where?
18.
Where
What
are you
will be
getting
the?
this from?
It's literal. I'm saying the. That's what the book is called. The Principles of Communism.
By who?
Friedrich Engels, who was
Okay, that's
the
not Marx.
co-thinker of Marx.
Okay, this is
Finally, when
Marxist-Leninist.
all
No,
capital, all
calm
production,
down.
all
No,
exchange has been
you're
brought
giving me
together in the hands of the
Marxist-Leninist.
nation, private property will disappear on its own accord, money will become
No,
superfluous, and
I'm gonna
production
read.
will
I'm
so
gonna read
expand, and man
Engels.
so change society will be able to slough off whatever of its old economics habits may remain.
I mean, okay. I asked you where in Marx, not Engels. So you're
I'm not a
saying,
Marxist anyway. I'm a communist, not a Marxist.
okay, I don't care. You're saying that I can't be a socialist, which is different than communism. And because I believe in money, I don't think that money has anything to do with the idea of being a socialist. Like, you don't have to believe in labor vouchers. I think maybe that's a cool idea. I'd be open to it, but I don't think that this uh disavows you as a socialist. So I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, let's try to restart this. Okay. What I'm saying is that you're arguing about mechanisms and I'm giving you mechanisms and you're saying they are not mechanisms, which
Yeah, they're not.
yes they are.
Where? Give me one.
What do you mean give you one? I already said the
Well, you did it.
synthetic federation is in
That's
itself
not
a
a mechanism.
mechanism. That is a mechanism.
How do you bring about the what was synthetic
The synthetic
federation?
federation. You
Yeah, how do you
bring
bring
that
that
up.
about? What's the mechanism?
You in your commune, you talk with other people in other communes
You
and
already have a
about
commune.
what exactly you want.
So you already have a commune.
You okay, you want me to describe to you how you create a commune? Are we at that level?
No, I'm just saying you already have the commune, and you're trying to convince
Yes, you have the commune, right?
and
You
you
have the
convince other
commune and
people to
within
stick
the you
together.
let me finish.
Okay.
You're within the commune and you have this need, right? You have this need that needs to be fulfilled, right?
Can you
Staying
give me
with
an
me
example
here.
of a need real quick? Just I just
An
want.
example of a need. You people in your commune want to be able to travel to great distances, right? They want to be able to travel, say, to the coast or something.
No, I'm asking you. Okay, but I'm asking you the mechanism from going from
Going
like
from
in the
that
state
idea,
to outside of the state.
you want to do it from going from in a state to without outside of a state. Okay, that's a different example. That's a revolution.
Yeah. Or maybe the other would be like the need that you're talking about is to not have a state arise. How would you do that?
Okay, that's two entirely different things. Let me tackle the
Yeah,
first.
I'm giving you an option. Like, do you want to do the former or the latter? Because I think
I'll
either.
do the first one. The next one I could probably do, but it will take a longer time to describe. But the first one is the anarchist revolution, right? Um, I'd say, in my view, and I'm not saying I am correct, because let's be honest, I'm probably not. And for anybody to claim they're 100% correct, that is extremely arrogant of them. But in my opinion, as an anarchist who isn't the most informed person in the world, I would say the best way to bring out about a revolution, an anarchist revolution, would be first to reestablish community, because I think that in this stage of capitalism, we have been effectively atomized from each other, right? We regard each other more in terms of the commodities that we can offer, the services that we can offer, than as individuals. And we can fight against that, but that's a difficult proposition. But our first operation is to fight against that. We have to rebuild community, rebuild these communal sort of the communal sort of idea, the communal spirit, um, bring back a sense of togetherness within the within a communal area, right? And all right, and so that's the first thing we need to do as anarchists. We need to recreate this community sense. We can do this through things like community groups, which we create through things like mutual aid organizations, which we create things such as community defense organizations against institutions like the police, etc., etc. We can uh, do that through all of these different organizational structures.
The police.
Now,
It's not a monopoly on the use of force, which we already defined as the state.
you said to resist the police is not to create a monopoly of violence, it's to resist a monopoly of violence, right?
What? I never said that, but you're saying that you're going to create police, but to me,
No,
police.
I didn't say create police. I said create community defense organizations
The police.
against things like the police.
Oh, okay. But
Yeah,
they're like counter police, anti
they're
police.
like, yeah, a bit like that. They would provide like something like helping other people out with their things, but they wouldn't be like the police.
But what happens if someone violates the law?
Well, it would depend on the law, right? If somebody killed someone, then we're probably going to do something about it, right?
Wasn't that
Because
monopoly use of
I
force?
wouldn't I would say that's more of a situation of where we we recognize, right, that taking away the life of another is ultimate taking away of freedom, right?
Um,
It's the ultimate taking away of agency
well,
of
I don't do politics like this, no. But go ahead. I'll hear you
okay.
out.
Okay. So taking away murdering somebody is basically taking away their autonomy, their freedom, everything forever. It's terrible. It's so by allowing that, if we allow that, that's a negative freedom, and that's something we should not allow, basically. Um, and
Wait,
so
wait. Like all of this is confusing me because like there's no monopoly on force enforcing any of this. So
yeah,
like,
yes, there's people would do this without a monopoly on force. But that's this
how
is
do you,
do you want the example of like within the commune society or within current society? What would you like?
I want you to tell me how you're going to convince these people not to do
Convince people not to what?
like your anti-defense police, anti-police defense force, or whatever you're talking about. How are you going to convince them not to become the police?
Well, basically, first of all, this wouldn't be like an institutionalized force. It wouldn't be like, oh, you've got a badge, you've got a gun, blah blah blah. You are the power of the land.
Like,
It wouldn't be like that. It would be more like a thing is, if you want to, you go out and
not
help people respond to things.
how do you prevent them from not becoming institutional? This is what I'm asking.
What do you mean, like prevent them from not becoming institutionalized?
No,
We would do that.
how do you prevent them from being institutional?
That's more of an example. First of all, you're detracting from the larger point of this, which is how to engage in
I'm
the
asking
anarchist
you how
revolution.
your anti-police force, how do you make them not institutionalized?
All right. Um. First of all, if I want to call it a police force. Second of all, it would be okay. I'm trying to. This is very tiring because I'm trying to describe things which are pretty obvious to me. Um.
Yeah, but they're not obvious to everyone else. So you need to describe
Yes,
them.
which is
It
why
doesn't
I
matter
don't
how
like.
obvious it
Yes,
is.
which is why I don't like voice chats and why I didn't want to do it yesterday.
Well, I'm glad that you did it because this is a good discussion. So thank you.
Anyway, okay. What am I trying to say? All right. I would argue more for a hue and cry sort of thing of what are you talking about? Who? Yes, I did.
No, I'm
Um,
saying what is the
I'm
mechanism?
I'm sorry. Somebody pinged me. I was responding to that. Okay.
The mechanism to keep an anti-police force from becoming a police force.
Well, first of all, there wouldn't be a monopoly on violence, right? What authority would they have? Their
Well, they
authority their
first
authority would extend to as far as we
yeah,
ourselves give them the authority to do so. And
but
if
the
we no
very-
longer give them the authority to do so, then we can actively fight against them as if they are the police.
no, we can't because
Yes, we can.
if anti-defense force is strong enough to defeat the police, which is the de facto monopoly on power, then they are now the de facto monopoly on power. They have surpassed the police, so they are now the de facto. So how do you stop them from imposing their force on you? It may be the case that they do it.
Wisdom, I am not a boy.
Nope.
I'm talking to Wisdom there in the chat. I'm not a boy. All
Okay.
right. But
Please
anyway,
use people's pronouns the way they want to on this server. I actually kind of sick of the disrespect that people have been getting when they clearly have labeled who they are and what they want to be identified as. So if you want to be an asshole and do that, then keep doing it. But I'm not. I'm
okay.
not.
Okay. Okay. See, I have like two options here. Either I can keep trying to describe something which is obvious to me but is very hard to describe for me unless I am like talking about it in text, or I can like literally read off of this book I have. Like what do you want me to do?
I think we've come to the end of the debate. On this,
No,
I
no.
think we've given our.
But I'm not even done with my point.
Yeah,
I'm
but I
not
think we need
even
to go. We're on an hour and 40 minutes, so I think
okay.
what we're gonna do is
Let me
we're gonna
just
do the questions.
let me just finish my larger point
No,
about
I'm gonna give you a closing statement, and then we're gonna go to questions from the audience. Okay.
okay. Okay, fine, sure. Uh, okay. First of all, I didn't like how this went because not because I felt like, Nietzsche was doing bad, not because it was more because I felt like I was doing bad. Again, I'm not good at voice debates. I'd rather we not put this on a channel, but if you want to, go ahead. But essentially, my closing argument is that uh I don't see why the state is a necessary idea, basically. I don't see what it's exactly trying to solve. I see it as causing far more problems with this creation of resentment, with this um, creation of, this barely contained chaos of the state than it would in a voluntary society. And I understand it might be hard to perceive something like voluntary communities deciding to join in synthetic federation. It might be hard to understand how an anarchist revolution will come about, and I get that. And I had to read a lot of books a lot at a time to convince me towards this position. But I will say that I think the state is not necessary for bringing about a socialist society, and that in fact it is in principle against the larger idea of the socialist society, that being emancipation, at least in my view, emancipation from all forms of hierarchical violence, um, hierarchical exploitation against the workers, against the people, against people of a different gender, against people who are of a minority race and such. So that's my closing argument. I know it wasn't good. I'll try to do better next time. Thank you. I'll take questions.
Okay. I just want to say thank you, Rogue. I know I might come across as a little harsh on you. This is nothing personal. I have my strong beliefs. You have your own strong beliefs, and so I really appreciate you coming on though. And like the reason I wanted you to come on was because we've only had ANCAPs debate on this server, and I wanted to see what an ANCOM perspective was, and I wanted to
All right.
like bring it out, and like I was really trying to like give you the room to develop your position.
If you
And
want, like, if you want me to, I could try to, like, maybe some other time I could type up something and actually have, like, this rehearsed more or something, but yeah, I understand. Thank you for giving me the time.
yeah, and
Yeah.
you're one of my favorite contributors. I don't want you to, think
Okay.
that I'm out to get
So,
your. I think
all
you're
right.
great.
All right.
But why don't we go to the questions?
Questions.
Yeah.
All right. So first question.
Anyone? Does anyone want to? First of all, does anyone want to unmute and ask a question?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anybody wanna?
I have a question.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought you did good. From what I heard, I missed the first half of the debate, I think. But from what I heard, it was interesting. I guess it kind of ties into what you posted yesterday, but also I guess there were a couple times where some of that stuff came up here today too. I think while I was trying to make sense of your argument, the one of the main things that kept coming up for me, and I don't know if this is something that you've heard a million times already, and maybe this isn't something new that I'm stumbling on, but I think what was coming up for me a lot was there were a lot of things like that I find myself asking, like, okay, this is sort of the anarchist position. This is how they kind of understand what they want. This is what they want to be different. But there's certain things that I hear in that vein that, like, I look out at the society that I live in now, and I'm like, well, I kind of feel like we already have this, like this whole idea of like being able to kind of leave a place and go somewhere else. Like I can do that. I can't go and move into a mansion. I have some
Yeah.
restrictions, but if I want, I could go and live in some other state, if I wanted to.
Yeah. Is that it?
Hmm.
Okay. So I think the anarchist position on this, I kind of explained it yesterday, but ask questions if you want to. But essentially, what we think is that um I think I described it yesterday. If I didn't describe it good enough, I said we all live and have for some time live in essentially the same sorts of sets of states with the same sorts of sets of rules. There are, differences, and in some cases there are what people would perceive as large differences, like a Sharia law state or something. But generally, we all have these same sorts of states, and they have these same sorts of things of having a pretty much capitalist society, having a pretty much capitalist evaluation of property rights and such, and saying that if you dare to go against certain things or dare to break certain laws which do not have victims or something, then you will be punished for this, and if you dare to go against the state actively, you will be punished, you will be treated as the enemy. So I think the anarchist position is that essentially, yes, you can move to other states, but that these states, it's like a capitalist saying, "Oh, if you don't like your wage earner job, you can just get, another job. You can just go to this other firm." I would argue it's largely the same. The same dynamics are at play. It's not really a real choice. It's more of a Hobson's choice. Whereas the anarchist society is more of one of, like I said yesterday, if if your society is all about, oh, we're all vegan, you can go to move a society which eats meat. If they're a communist or communalist society and you don't kind of like that idea, you can go ahead and go to a mutualist society or something. So I'd say that the anarchist position is more that we want a I don't know if you could call it true voluntary, but we wanted more of a voluntary societies rather than your basic choice of society is between, it's the same Barbie doll, but it's dressed up in something different. Is that good enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think I still am gonna have more questions, but that's good for me for now. I'll let somebody else go.
Who else wants to go?
Anyone else have a question for me or Rogue? Just unmute, or you can put it in the chat. Anyone?
Anyone at all? I think Mark
And-
Santacopian had something.
Marxist
in
anti.
the-
Go ahead and
They-
unmute. Ask
They
your
had,
question.
they had something in the chat though.
I think he was gonna unmute. So
Okay. You go ahead and unmute if you want. If you don't, I'll just read off what you said. Or I think Jason might have a question.
Vince, you there?
Oh, hello. Do you have a question? If you're
Okay.
talking, we can't hear you, Vince.
Okay. I think Vince, something's up with his mic. So Jason's
Okay,
right.
Jason's writing, so we'll do the. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to answer your question? Do you want to do your question in text, Vince? One of us could read it off. We'll just answer whoever types up first.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay.
I'll ask you the question and you can answer.
Okay.
Have we covered the possibility of fascist or imperial states forming from a stateless vacuum? What can we do as a stateless society to prevent it? I think we did ask that
think
question.
we did. Yeah, we did ask that question. I don't think we reached like a good conclusion. And like I said, it would be that question is answered by like a lot of theory. It's just hard for me to articulate that like as of now. I have like no notes for this. But essentially the mechanism would be it's hard to describe mechanism. It would be something like communal organizations, communally organized defenses, and expectations and such against such those who would wish to take power. Recognizing education towards recognizing the attributes, what exactly creates these fascistic states, and using these warnings, being aware of these signs, and and using whatever methods we have, probably not like capital punishment or anything, but methods we have at our disposal to mollify this or detract against this. And that people would like more specific things. The problem with specifics in talking about anarchism is that there's like a million ways to solve things, and a lot of communities would have different ways to solve things. But if you want like a very specific example, let me try.
Maybe we can go to the next
Yeah,
question.
let's go to the next question. But essentially, I can answer you later in text. But essentially, we have educational mechanisms and other community defense mechanisms in place to at least attempt to mollify such a thing. Anyway, next question is Vince.
Why revolution as opposed to, say, ghost guns? Diffuse weapon ownership gradually changing what the state can practically do. You seemed skeptical of this, but why doesn't the threat of Pyrrhic victory for the state help to get what you want?
Okay. This strikes me as similar to the agorist argument. Of essentially, using peaceful a black market means to overthrow the state. I'm saying that even if you have a situation where you have sort of peaceful-ish dissent against the state and not exactly usurping, but undermining the state, that wouldn't really be a mechanism towards destroying the state. The state would still have power over the political economy. It would still have power over individuals, especially individuals who cannot produce these things. It would still have power over making firms. It would still, have this sort of state oligarchy sort of deal, this state capitalist or oligarchy sort of deal. It would probably mollify the state somewhat. It would make them more wary of knocking on people's doors and taking their shit or something. But I think that as a means of actually overthrowing and abolishing the state, then I don't think that something like diffusing gun ownership towards literally everyone would, in effect, be an effective means of overthrowing the state unless you had some sort of ideologically backed means and method of destroying the state, which isn't just, hey, let's give everyone guns. But yeah, I think that's good.
All right.
Any other questions?
I'm gonna go ahead and end the recording. We're at 2 hours.
Okay, go ahead and end the recording, but I will continue to answer questions. So
We're
goodbye,
gonna have a
everyone on the
free-form-
video.
free-form discussion at this point.
Okay,
So,
so freeform. Ask whatever you want. Anybody have any other questions? Oh,
or just come
Us.
chat with us. Come chat with us this
Or
one.
come chat
We're
with us.
recording.
Yeah,
Us,
fuck
yes.
it.
What do you think about the economy of examples?
The what?
Excellent.
The
I'm
what?
just the economy of examples.
Okay, Tusk had a question. You could accept the fact that in a stateless society, there would be many attempts and successful attempts to create microstates. It depends on your definition of the microstate, I would say. I mean, if we are saying that they're distinct from states, then I guess you could, in a theory, describe the commune as a quote microstate, but I don't know. I need like a more concrete definition of the microstate before we go into how they would, if they would be created. If we're talking about something more like a fiefdom, I guess, I think that would depend more on like there being property rights existing and like some individuals having personal property over others, which would kind of negate the communism, but I guess, I mean, it could exist. I don't see it as I don't see it as like the most, I see it as a possibility, but not as like the most pressing possibility, I guess.